Good morning, Doc Valendes. Good morning, classmates. I am Mr. Limarci Parian. So today I'll be presenting to you my three theories that I have researched on the internet about language. So actually, this is I'll be presenting to you the development of uh, linguistic theories or language. So I have researched on three theories. I'll be talking about Chomsky linguistic theory, and followed by Himes, and lastly, I'll be talking also about Canal and Swain um, enrichment theory. Okay, to start with, so I have here the Chomsky and transformational generative grammar. So first is about Chomsky theory. So the most significant development in linguistic theory and research in the 20th century was the rise of generative grammar, and more especially of transformational generative grammar, or transformational grammar as it came to be known. Two versions of transformational grammar were put forward in the mid 1950s, the first by Zelig S. Harris and the second by Noam Chomsky, his pupil. It was Chomsky's system that attracted the most attention. Noam Chomsky has made distinguished achievements in many fields, including linguistics, philosophy, intellectual history, international politics, and etc. He is a fellow in several societies, including linguistics, politics, psychology, arts, and sciences in the United States and abroad. He is awarded honorary degrees from tens of universities, from Cambridge University to Harvard University. However, he is best known for his contribution in linguistics. So during the years of 1951 to 1955, Chomsky was a junior fellow of the Harvard University Society of Fellows. While a junior fellow, he completed his doctoral dissertation entitled Transformational Analysis. The major theoretical viewpoints of the dissertation appeared in the monograph Syntactic Structure, which was published in 1957. These form part of a more extensive work, The Logical Structure of Linguistic Theory, circulated in Mimeograph in 1955 and published in 1975. The reason why Chomsky invented new theory for structuralism is that he found that there are many limitations in the classification of language structure according to distribution and arrangement. So he started to punch the prevailing structuralist descriptive linguistics. Due to his academic practice, Chomsky established the world famous transformational generative grammar step by step. In 1957, he published his syntactic structure, which marked the beginning of the Chomskyan revolution. As first presented by Chomsky in syntactic structure, so transformational grammar can be seen partly as reaction against post-Bloomfieldian structuralism, as partly as continuation of it. What Chomsky reacted against most strongly was the post-Bloomfieldian concern with discovery procedure. In his opinion, linguistics should set itself the more modest and more realistic goal of formulating criteria for evaluating alternative descriptions of a language without regard to the question of how these descriptions had been arrived at. The statements made by the linguists in describing a language should, however, be cast within the framework of a far more precise theory of grammar than had hitherto been to the case, and this theory should be formalized in terms of modern mathematical notions. Within a few years, Chomsky had broken with the post-Bloomfieldians on a number of other points also. He had adopted what he called a mentalistic theory of language, by which term he implied that the linguist should be concerned with the speaker's creative linguistic competence and not his performance. The actual utterances produced. He had challenged the post-Bloomfieldian concept of of the phoneme, which many scholars regarded as the most solid and enduring result of the previous generation's work, and he had challenged the structuralists insistence upon the uniqueness of every language, claiming instead that all languages were to be, or to a considerable degree, cut to the same pattern. They shared a certain number of formal and substantive universals. By observing that some important facts had never been analyzed adequately, Chomsky gave an innateness hypothesis. First, children acquire language competence very fast and with almost no effort. It has been universally acknowledged that the children become fluent speakers of their native language by the age of 5. If we consider the facts that children shall never be intellectually prepared for any other subjects of science, this is quite a shocking fact. A child never seems to make conscious, intentional, painstaking efforts in acquiring his native language, as in learning any other subject, such as mathematics or physics. What's more, one amazing phenomenon is that the first language acquisition unconditionally takes place without any intentional or explicit teaching of it. And the language a child hears is often not necessarily the most standard of the language she is acquiring. What is that which enables a child retain those correct expressions and avoid what is not proper in the language? In terms of stages of language acquisition, all children usually follow the same stages: the babbling stage, the nonsense word stage, holophrastic stage, two-word utterance, developing grammar, near adult grammar, and full competence. In terms of the correctness of grammar, a child cannot only produce and understand sentences he has heard, but also sentences he has never come across before. The questions are the ones that the former linguists never thought about seriously. Through discussing these questions, Chomsky insists that if children are not born with a predisposition to acquire a language in almost the same way as they are born with the innate ability to walk, these phenomena shall never be possible. So, basing on the hypothesis, Chomsky believed that the language competence is what innate and that our children are born with a language acquisition device or language competence, which fit children for language learning. LAD is supposed to consist of three elements: a hypothesis maker or linguistic universal, an evaluation procedure. Chomsky further put out a new theory, a generative grammar. By this, he simply means a system of rules that in some explicit and well-defined way assigns structural descriptions to sentences. That is, Chomsky believed that every child of a language is proficient in and internalized a kind of generative grammar that proves his knowledge of his first language. And the theory of generative grammar experienced altogether 5 periods from the beginning until the later theories, which has really brought life to structuralism in the later half of last century, helped it to go on. But the theory itself has been very much controversial. Some scholars completely accept it. Some agree that it is a kind of breakthrough of structuralism, but do not agree with all of it. And there are some totally reject it. And among them, there are even his students. All right. So that was the first. Okay, Chomsky generative grammar or the language competence. So after which, here comes Heim's communicative competence, shift from structuralism to functionalism. Okay, now let's find out what's Heim's communicative competence all about. So Del Heims, Commonwealth Professor of Anthropology, Emeritus Professor of University of Virginia, teaching classes in linguistic anthropology, Native American mythology, ethnopoetics, and Native American poetry. He's one of the persons who do not completely agree with Chomsky. All right. So based on the information gathered about Chomsky, there are people who disagree. All right. So one of those is Himes. Okay. So Himes do not completely agree with Chomsky. So Himes uses his knowledge of anthropology, linguistics, and ethnography in working with verbal traditions and languages of Oregon and Washington. In 1972, Himes pointed out in 2014 Academy Publisher Journal of Language Teaching and Research that Chomsky theory about language competence is not convincing enough to interpret language phenomenon. So see, yeah, he's one who is against of Chomsky's theory about language competence. So he put forward the theory of communicative competence. In it, he argues that language competence is part of communicative competence, which includes four parts. Okay, so there are, according to him, that language competence, okay, this is Chomsky's theory, is part of communicative competence, which includes four parts. First, we have this probability. It is whether or not communicative competence can be accordance with grammar rules, whether or not communicative competence can be realized in the level of language form. Second, practicability. It is whether or not a language can be used for communication and to what degree it can be involved in communication. Third, accuracy. It is whether or not a speech is appropriate in a certain context and to what degree it is appropriate. And lastly, the fourth one, effectiveness. It is whether or not a speech has been made and to what degree it has been made. Right? So, according to Delheims, communicative competence was developed, okay? It was developed by Delheims to describe and account for the knowledge that speakers and listeners have in order to communicate appropriately in different social contexts. So it is a central notion of social linguistics and other socially oriented approaches to the study of language. So Himes' view of communicative competence brought an anthropological understanding to language, as it provides a model for analyzing a communicative event in its social-cultural context. His model indicates the various parameters that govern communication in terms of what to say, when, to whom, and how to say it, and with what intention. This set of parameters, in its pragmatic, goal-oriented, and functional aspects, has served as a guide for language teaching since the 1980s. It formed the basis of the functional approach to language teaching, which was developed further in the threshold levels of the Council of Europe, the precursor to Common European Framework, which I discussed. Okay. This approach focused on language functions in a few specific domains of language use, such as shopping, travel, house and home, food and drink. Language teaching for communicative competence reduced Himes' notion of communication to a limited and fixed set of situational topics through which the learner would encounter and practice communicative acts such as giving a warning, inviting someone, or asking for help within set domains using set phrases. Its focus became a goal-oriented view of language where limited features of the situational context were the principal determinants of the linguistic choices to be made. Reducing language teaching predominantly to the context of situation limits the learner's understanding of the role that our social and cultural environment has to play in our language use. Considering the context according to the set parameters assumes that the rules for social communication used in one situation are the same in all situations of that kind. Like the Sausarian tradition, it assumes stability of meaning. It ignores the unpredictability of communicate events and the individual choices we might make in our utterances to respond to the context. It could be argued that learners would at least need to learn the conventions used in a certain communicative settings. But even in situations governed largely by conventions, we have the freedom to act in accordance with those conventions or not. As Kress argues, even a decision to conform is an act of choice, and as such involves a new production of the meaning conformity. So, however, It is not only limited to interpretations of Himes' formulation of communicative competence, view of language, which is the problem. I believe that his model was helping us to understand a very important role of the immediate context or the context of the situation does not fully address the idea of complexity of culture. Even though cultural conventions are addressed through the parameters of norm and John arguably a social view of context, it does not question or consider the wider view of context of culture, which consists of wider societal influences and ideological forces and discourses. Himes did consider ideology in his later work, which I will refer to in the next chapter, but will not impact on language teaching. So basically, what's the difference between linguistic or language competence of Chomsky and communicative competence of Himes? Okay, it was Chomsky who started about the language acquisition. So he developed the language competence or linguistic competence, and later on, Delheims did not totally agree about Chomsky theory. So he developed his own theory, which is the communicative competence. So what's the difference between the two? So, first, linguistic competence and communicative competence are two important concepts in the field of language learning and teaching. While they are related, they refer to different aspects of language proficiency. So, linguistic competence or language competence refers to a person's knowledge of the rules of a language, including grammar, vocabulary, and syntax. It is the ability to use language accurately and appropriately in a variety of contexts. Linguistic competence is often associated with formal language learning, such as in a classroom setting, and it is typically assessed through tests and exams. While communicative competence, on the other hand, refers to person's ability to use language effectively in real life situations. It involves not only linguistic knowledge, but also social and cultural knowledge, as well as the ability to use language appropriately in different contexts and with different interlocutors. Communicative competence is often associated with informal language learning. So, linguistic competence or language competence talks about formal. So while communicative competence is informal language learning, such as through immersion or interaction with native speakers. So and it is typically assessed through performance-based tasks such as a role plays or the conversation. So we can see that language competence or linguistic competence is basically learned inside a classroom setting when someone is teaching, while communicative competence is informal. So it is uh, language learning. It is a informal language learning, such as through immersion. So the children or the child would learn through immersion or interaction with native speakers, and it is typically assessed through performance-based tasks. Unlike with the linguistic competence, it is assessed through tests and exams. So, in other words, while linguistic competence focuses on the knowledge of the language itself, communicative competence focuses on the ability to use that language in real life situation. A person can have a high level of linguistic competence but still struggle to communicate effectively in a social or cultural context, while a person with a lower level of linguistic competence may be able to communicate effectively in a variety of situations due to their communicative competence. In language teaching, it is important to develop both linguistic and communicative competence in learners. So basically, the two are still important. While a strong foundation in linguistic competence is necessary for effective communication, communicative competence is what allows learners to use their language skills in real life situation and to interact successfully with. So we have differentiated uh, the language or linguistic competence of Chomsky and the communicative competence of Delheims. So based on that, we could conclude that the language competence and the communicative competence are equally important in language teaching and learning. Okay, so lastly, after Delheim's, we also have Canal and Swain's enrichment to communicative competence. So basically, this Canal and Swain's, they supported the theory of Delheim's about communicative competence. All right. So during the 1980s, Canal and Swain contributed more to enrich Himes' communicative competence. Okay. They thought that communicative competence at least includes four aspects of knowledge and skills. First, the linguistic competence. Okay, so the innate grammar of a speaker, which helps to generate correct sentence, the same as what Chomsky refers to. And secondly, social linguistic competence. It is the ability of a speaker to understand the speech of others and make a speech appropriately due to a certain kind of time, place, and partner he or she is talking with. Okay, from the name itself, social linguistic. Next is discourse competence. It is the ability of a speaker to generate meaning out of disordered language data. So it includes two aspects named cohesion and coherence. And lastly, the fourth one, strategic competence, or the ability of a speaker to use different kinds of communication strategies according to different discourse, such as avoidance, interpretation, transcription, asking for help, pretending to be having not heard, euphemism, correction, repetition, hesitation, guess, and etc., for the purpose of achieving successful communication. Moreover, another model of communicative competence was presented by the two Canadian applied linguists. So it is Michael Cannell and Merrill Swain in 1980s. So in the first issue of Applied Linguistics, referring to the weak or neural and strong version of Chomsky competence recognized by Campbell and Wales. Cannell and Swain agree with Himes' criticism on Chomsky's notions of competence, performance distinction, and that provides no place for consideration of the appropriateness of socio-cultural significance of the utterance in a situational and verbal context in which it is used. Furthermore, referring to two views regarding to the relationship between grammatical competence and communicative competence, they advocate Monbiot's stance, which sees grammatical competence as subpart of communicative competence. Okay, the grammatical competence is referring to the language competence of Chomsky, and not something separate from it. They emphasize, just as Himes was able to say, that there are rules of grammar that would be useless without rules of language use. So we feel that there are rules of language use that would be useless without rules of grammar. However, they believe their notion of communicative competence is different from that of Himes because first, unlike Himes, they do not incorporate the notion of ability for use into their definition of communicative competence. Even though they supported Himes' theory about communicative competence, okay, there are somewhat a slight difference. Okay, so they pointed out that they did not incorporate the notion of ability for use into their definition of communicative competence. So reviewing theories of basic communication skills, social-linguistic perspective of communicative competence, and integrative theories of communicative competence, Cannell and Swain suggest 5 guiding principles for a communicative approach. So these include, number 1, communicative competence is composed minimally of grammatical competence, social-linguistic competence, and communication strategies, or what we will refer to as strategic competence. Secondly, a communicative approach must be based on and respond to the learner's communication needs. Third, the second language learner must have opportunity to take part in a meaningful communicative interaction with highly competent speakers of the language to respond to the genuine communicative needs in realistic second language situation. Fourth, particularly at the early stages of second language learning, optimal use must be made of those aspects of communicative competence that the learner has developed through acquisition and the use of the native language and that are common to those communication skills required in the second language. Lastly, the fifth one, the primary objective of a communication-oriented second language program must be to provide the learners with the information, practice, and much of the experience needed to meet their communicative needs in a second language. All right, I believe that's all my presentation about the development of linguistic theories. Started with Chomsky, followed by Dalheims, and it was supported by Canol and Swain. I hope that you have learned what I have presented today, and thank you, Ma'am Valandis, for the opportunity to present my research about these theories. That's all. Thank you.